Hello everyone. Happy Tuesday. Hope you had a good day at school if you went to school today. And yeah, so today I'm going to be streaming an AP psychology topic. We're going to be talking about MESH, which is motivation, emotion, stress, and health, and then also personality and some other personality theories, hosted by me. Okay, so just for the weekly calendar, so you guys can know what streams that we have coming up pretty soon, and streams that you can keep an eye out for, some other streams that you might be interested in besides just psychology streams. So on Mondays, which was the past Monday, we had synthesis, introduction, paragraphs, and AP Lang. Then we had something with AP Gov and some other topics. And we also had an AP Calc AB, which was about position, velocity, and acceleration. And you can always go back and watch past streams. So if those streams interest you, you can always go to fiveable.me and then watch the past streams. And then Tuesday, which is earlier today, there was an AP Human Geo stream about urban models and hierarchy of cities. And then now I'm streaming about mesh and personality. And then later tonight, there will be a review of public policy. And then Wednesday, there is an AP Environmental Science stream about agricultural practices, and then something with bio with microevolution. And then on Thursday, there will be one for AP Push, the Cold War, AP Euro, and the Russian Revolution, and as well as AP World, Unit 7, Causation and Global Conflict. So yes, don't forget about these streams. Remember, you can always watch past streams on the Fiveable website. Okay, so great. So again, don't forget to follow @ThinkFiveable on Twitter, Instagram, and to subscribe on YouTube. All right, so in this stream, we're going to be reviewing MESH, which I mentioned is motivation, emotion, stress, and health. And we'll also be reviewing some personality theories that are important to know, and as well as a few multiple choice questions that I have in this stream. Okay, so the first thing we're going to be talking about today is MESH, which is, like I mentioned, motivation, emotion, stress, and health. All right, so there are some theories of motivation that you need to know. First, you need to know what instinct is. Instinct is that complex behaviors have a fixed pattern and are not learned, which really explains animal motivation, because animals have behaviors which are just behaviors that they do normally and naturally that are not necessarily learned. For instance, if you put food in front of the dog will naturally salivate. Was that a behavior learned by the dog? No. There was no period in a dog's life where they had to learn how to salivate. It just happened naturally when the food was placed in front of them. So that's sort of an instinct. And then also we have an important theory of motivation, which is drive reduction, which is when someone has a physiological need which creates a drive, which motivates that person to satisfy their need, to therefore return to equilibrium or homeostasis. And there are two different types of drives that you have to be aware of. First, there is a primary drive, which is an unlearned drive based on survival, such as hunger and thirst. And then there's also a secondary drive, which is a learned drive, so wealth or success. And again, primary, unlearned, something that happens naturally, is natural for humans to be hungry, thirsty, etc. And a secondary drive is something that you are learned and motivated by to satisfy, which may be wealth. You may have a desire to obtain a lot of wealth in life, and that would be a secondary drive. Or you may have a desire to obtain a lot of success in life, and that is also a secondary drive, because those were both learned drives. Those were not innate. People were not born with drives to obtain wealth or to become massively successful. And then with which is about arousal, and it claims that easier tasks require a higher level of arousal, while harder tasks require a lower level of arousal. So yes, humans, and I just mentioned it briefly, optimal arousal. Humans will aim to seek optimal levels of arousal. Easier tasks require more arousal, or harder tasks require less. So that's important to know, the Yerkes-Dodson law. What is the okay? So Tucker Neal asks, what is the correlation of a secondary drive and homeostasis? Well, well, there may be a certain part in life that you're not uneasy with. Like you may not have the certain amount of wealth or success that you have. Let's just say you are trying to. Let's just say you own a business and you're at a certain standpoint in your business where you have, I don't know, maybe 1,000 in the bank, but you really want to get to 2,000. So you have that drive for, I guess, the wealth or the success. So once you get to that 2,000, you sort of reach equilibrium or homeostasis, where you had the drive to motivate it, and then you satisfied the need. I hope that answers that. It's just basically a need, a drive, and then satisfying that need or drive. So, and we have two different types. It can be primary or secondary. And primary is just any unlearned drive, and secondary are things that had to be learned. Okay, great, no problem. Okay, and then, so now we also have Maslow's hierarchy of needs, which is basically that the hierarchy of needs by Maslow is that to achieve most basic needs before moving up the hierarchy, needs at the bottom are greater priority. So, for instance, before you can even reach self-actualization, you have to have these four at the bottom. First, starting with physiological, you have to have food, water, and rest before you feel the need to fulfill safety, these things, and then going up. So you start from the bottom and you go up, and these are a greater priority. And no, you cannot skip levels. Maslow said you cannot skip levels in the hierarchy of needs. Everyone starts from the bottom and works their way up. And in life, some people may never reach self-actualization. Some people may never really achieve their full potential, is what he believed. Some people may get stuck on certain levels, like love and belonging or esteem, before they can reach the next level. So it's just a transition, starting from the bottom to the top. And then to know with the hierarchy of needs is intrinsic motivation, which is your inner motivation, which is doing something because you like it. Reading a book about quantum physics because you like it, not because you're required to do it for your college class, just because you want to do it. And then extrinsic motivation would be motivation to obtain a reward or trophy. So maybe you really don't like quantum physics, but you're going to really study really hard and read the book because you know that if you read the book and you study the material well enough, you will get an A. So that's sort of the extrinsic motivation, because the A is like the reward or the trophy. So yeah, you can think about in life, what are some of your intrinsic motivations, some of your extrinsic motivations in life. All right, now we're going to talk about hunger. Okay, so stomach contractions are what signal hunger in humans and other mammals, I guess, and other creatures. And then glucose is sugar level, which is maintained by the pancreas, which is part of our endocrine system. And then we have insulin, which decreases glucose. And to know that too much glucose makes people hungry. And then orexin is released by the hypothalamus, which tells us to eat. And then we also have a lateral hypothalamus. And what the lateral hypothalamus does, it actually makes individuals hungry. But when this is damaged, an individual will not eat again. So in order to make it easy to remember, that lateral hypothalamus makes hungry, and if lesioned, will not eat. Because there may be some multiple choice questions on the AP exam that ask about the lateral hypothalamus. So the way I remembered it was that late and cannot eat. I don't know if that really helps. It kind of helped me because like if you're late, you can't do something, you missed out on the opportunity. So because of the late in the word lateral, I thought about late as like, oh, it's past that time to do something. So that helped me remember that when lesion, the lateral hypothalamus, you cannot eat again because it's late. Then the next type of hypothalamus is the ventromedial hypothalamus. And if this is working properly, an individual will feel full. Although, if it is destroyed, an individual will continue to eat. So those are really both important to know for the AP test because they could be tested on either multiple choice or free response. For example, in the multiple choice, it could ask you about either or, and then it could say, if lesioned, what would happen, or et cetera, or on the FRQ, it may ask you to describe those in a certain situation. Because if you're familiar with the free response questions on the AP psychology exam, they sort of set up scenarios, and you have to apply terms to the scenarios. So it's really important to know the definition of both and what would happen to a person if both were damaged. So yes, that's important to know. Okay, so now with continuing hunger. Okay, so leptin. Leptin signals the brain to reduce appetite. So we have orexin, which we talked about here. Remember what orexin was? Orexin released the hypothalamus tells us to eat. So it actually tells you to eat orexin. And then we have leptin, which signals the brain to reduce appetite. So yeah, remember the distinction between the two. And then, there's the set point theory in hunger, which states that control dictates how much fat an individual should carry, and it's different for every person. So each individual will have a different set point, which basically just determines the weight that you have is the weight that you're set to have. It's not that you shouldn't really gain any more weight or lose any more weight. It's just your set point and how much weight that you should carry. Okay, so now with continuing eating, we're going to talk about some eating disorders. So anorexia nervosa is an obsessive desire to lose weight, which includes resisting eating, mainly because of a distorted body image, but there's also different causes. So some other causes due to anorexia may be perfectionist tendencies, and then also societal ideas and viewing how society should see people could cause someone to maybe indulge in an anorexia nervosa disorder. And then secondly, we have bulimia, which is also a desire to lose weight, but it's through a different means. With bulimia, it involves purge eating patterns, which involve eating massive amount of foods, and then exposing the amount of foods through various methods, including throwing up the food or sometimes taking a heavy amount of laxatives. And the causes are the same as anorexia, which are perfectionist tendencies as well as following to societal ideals, or what thinking that society, how people should look in society. Okay, so now we're going on. Are there any questions so far with any of that? I hope that all made sense. If there's any question, just let me know specifically. But yeah, so we went over some theories of motivation, and then we went over hunger, and so now we're going into emotion. Okay, so there are 3 different theories of emotion and AP psychology, and what I have on the board is a diagram of the James Lange theory of emotion. So what the James Lange theory of emotion says that when there is a stimulus, the physical arousal is what causes the emotion. So for example, if the stimulus was a growling dog, the physiological arousal would be the increased heart rate, and therefore that increased heart rate would cause the fear. So this theory is saying that it's the physiological sign which causes the emotion, in this case being fear. So basically, if a person were to see a dog and they feel their heart rate increasing, then that is what makes them say, "Oh, wow, I'm scared." That is what causes that emotion. And then, oops, I think I skipped one. Sorry. And then another theory of emotion is the Cannon-Barr theory of emotion. And this theory states that if there was a stimulus, in this case a growling dog, a signal will be sent to the part of the brain called the thalamus, and this will cause 2 things to happen at once. The physiological arousal will happen, and the emotion will happen simultaneously. So basically, I think of Cannon, boom, they both happen at the same time, the emotion and the physiological arousal. Okay, and then the last theory of emotion is the Schachter-Singer theory of emotion, which is a little bit different from the other 2 because it involves a new element to the system of how emotions are created. So in this case, there's a stimulus, the growling dog, then there is the physiological arousal, the increased heart rate, but now there is a cognitive label attached to it that results in the emotion of fear. So in this case, a person having a cognitive label of, wow, that growling dog was scary, causes them to feel fear because they put a label to it, which causes that particular emotion. If it was a different label, like, oh, wow, cool or something, the emotion would be different. But because they had the label of, wow, that was scary, that created the fear in them. Okay, so now I have a multiple choice practice that we've sort of went over the different emotions of theory, or theory of emotions. So this question is from a 2012 AP Psychology exam, and the question says that Stanley Schachter and Jerome Singer view emotion resulting from what? Is it from A, biochemical changes in the pituitary? Is it B, cognitive labels of physiological changes? Is it C, instinctual behavior? D, level of arousal? Or E, need for affiliation? I'll give you guys a few seconds to comment and answer what you think. Okay, so it's okay if you don't know the answer. We're going to go over it. So the answer to this question is B, cognitive labels of physiological changes. Like if I go back, here's the Schachter-Singer theory of emotion. We see a cognitive label, which is different from the other two theories, which don't include that label. So in summary, the James Lange theory of emotion says stimulus, physiological arousal, emotion. Then we go to the Cannon-Barr theory of emotion, which means that a stimulus causes both the emotion and physiological arousal to happen simultaneously because of the word canon. That helps me to remember it. And then Schachter-Singer theory of emotion, which involves a cognitive label to create the emotion fear. So yep, B is the correct answer, which I have here highlighted. Okay, so now we're going to be moving on to stress and health. So in stress and health, there is something called the GAS, or the GAS, or the General Adaptation Syndrome, which basically consists of 3 phases. So basically, if a human enters a period of stress, there will be 3 phases of the stress. So the first phase is the alarm phase, which is when the experience starts off being very, very stressful. And then someone will go through the resistance phase where they sort of get used to the stress. And then there's also the exhaustion phase where the stress is just too much to take and the person may become depressed. So we see here it's in the negative, then it comes positive, then it goes back down. So this is just how people can adapt to a stressor in life. They go through alarm phase or resistance phase and can even go into the exhaustion phase if they find it too hard to stand anymore. Okay, so also in stress and health, there are 2 types of personalities to know and be aware of, which are the type A personality. And the type A personality is very, very competitive, very aggressive, and pretty achievement-oriented / goal-oriented. And it is important to know that the type A personality is more likely to develop heart disease because of all the stress that they put on themselves in their life, and because of all their aggressions, they're more likely to face some sort of heart disease later in life. And a type B personality is a person who is more easygoing, less stressed, and pretty indifferent to various things. Okay, great. So we have finished MESH, which was motivation, emotion, stress, and health. And now we are going into personality and some different personality theories. So before I move on, were there any questions about MESH, or is it good to go into personality now? Okay, well, no one's setting concerns about mesh, so I'll go ahead and move on to personality. So personality is about 5 to 7% of the AP Psychology exam. And in this stream, we're going to be talking about some of the different theories and approaches to personality, such as psychoanalytic, humanist, cognitive, trait, and social cognitive and behavioral. And we're going to be talking about some people such as Alfred Adler, Albert Bandura, Paul Costa, Robert McCrae, Sigmund Freud, Carl Jung, and Abraham Maslow, as well as Carl Rogers. So I took this from the AP Psychology website just to show how we're covering the content listed on the website and the things that we will be discussing specifically about personality today. So yeah, it's pretty important to know personality because 5 to 7% of the exam, if you don't know anything about personality, could be the difference between a 4 and a 5. So it's important to know a lot of the different things about personality. Okay, great. So now I'm going to move right into the different theories. Okay, so first important figure that we're going to be talking about today is Sigmund Freud. So Sigmund Freud started his career as a physician, and then he became aware that there were these powerful mental processes which operated in our unconscious without our awareness. So, which led him to really create the psychoanalytic theory because of his awareness of these powerful mental processes in our unconscious. Okay, so the psychoanalytic theory. So it is important to know that in the psychoanalytic theory, there are 4 main assumptions. One is that the unconscious mind. Yes. The unconscious mind is powerful in shaping personality. And then the human mind has 3 provinces, which include the id, the ego, and then the superego. And that personality is shaped by early childhood experiences, and that as humans, we also use these things called defense mechanisms. I don't know why the slide is glitching, sorry, but it's going through all of the different points again. Okay, cool. So structure of personality, the id. So the id is the source of mental energy and drive, and it encompasses all basic human needs and desires. And it also involves the pleasure principle, which really states that the id seeks immediate gratification, which is why I had this image here. Give me food, I need air, I need to reproduce, make me mad, and I'll fight. The id seeks to obtain immediate gratification. And also I have an iceberg here as part of our conscious mind. We have some of the ego poking out, some of the superego, but most of our id, our sense to obtain immediate gratification, is buried underneath in our unconscious. Okay, so now we have the superego. And the superego is the internal representation of society's rules, morals, as well as obligations, which I have this image here on the right questioning, is it good? Is it right? And also, it is the complete opposite of the id. Where the id seeks immediate gratification, the superego really thinks about what's right in society and tries to make decisions based off society's rules, morals, obligations, thinking about, are things good, are they right, are they just? And then we have the ego. And the ego allows a person to function because it is very logical, and it is the mediator between the demands of both the id and the superego. And it involves the reality principle, which defers instant gratification when necessary because of obstacles of reality. Basically, it says that in order to satiate our drives, we will do it in a socially desirable way. So where the id wants it right then and there, and it seeks to have that immediate gratification, and the superego thinks a lot about the rules of society and life. The reality principle will find a way to, I guess, meet halfway and to think of a way that is really sociably desirable and work to achieve drives in that way. Okay, I like this image here because it really summarizes the psychoanalytic theory a lot and Freud's belief of personality, because we have here the id, which is saying, I need to eat right this second. And the superego is saying, no, you cannot do that because you're in the middle of an important meeting. You cannot take out your lunch right now. You cannot do that. And the ego is here like a judge saying, okay, I have to, one wants one thing, the other wants one thing, and I have to make the decision between the two. So yeah, I thought this was a pretty good summary of that. It's pretty funny, I thought. Oops, no. I didn't hope you didn't see that, anyone. Okay, so I got this multiple choice practice again from an old AP psychology exam. This is from the 2012 exam. And the question is, according to Freudian theory, the component of the personality that is blind, impulsive, and irrational is the blank. And I'll give you 2 seconds to answer what you think. What do you think it is? Correct, yes, it is the id. The id is the blind, impulsive, and very irrational. And here I have the arrow here next to the id, which is correct. Okay, so now we're going to be moving into some which I mentioned earlier in the four assumptions of the psychoanalytic theory. So basically, Freud hypothesized that the ego has to deal with anxiety produced by the id-superego conflict of deciding between immediate gratification and decisions between what is right and what is just in society. And it sort of deals with that conflict with the use of defense mechanisms. And there are various defense mechanisms that you need to know for the AP Psychology exam. And I will go over, I think, all of those today. Yeah, all of those in this stream, because they can be tested on either multiple choice or free response. So it's very important to know all the different defense mechanisms. So first, there is repression. And repression is that memories or desires that provoke anxiety are pushed into the unconscious. So an example of repression would be when people are involved in terrible accidents and have no memory of the accidents at all. So that example just shows that when people have such large anxiety, they push that into their unconscious, because if they went through a terrible accident or had severe trauma, in order for the mind to sort of fix itself and to help the person out, it might push that into the unconscious so they don't have any memory about what happened, so it won't cause them anxiety in their conscious life. And then there is displacement. So displacement is when anger is directed away from the source of the anger to a less threatening person or even an object. So for example, a boy who is angry at his mother may yell at a friend, because in a way, he's not taking the anger out on his mother, who is the source of the anger, but he's taking it on something that he sees to be as less threatening, which may be his friend. So in order to sort of cope with that anxiety, he takes all his anger out on his friend instead of his mother. So he displaces it. And then another defense mechanism is denial. So denial is the refusal to acknowledge or accept unwanted beliefs or actions. So for instance, an example of denial would be an alcoholic denying they have a drinking problem because they function well in their jobs and relationships. So they're refusing to accept this. They're saying, oh, well, because I have friends, I have a lot of friends. I go out to places. People like me around. I have a job. Okay, sure, they may have those things. They may have a job, but are they getting to their workplace on time? Maybe not. Are they doing all their assignments? Maybe not. So they're using it as like, oh, well, I have these things in life, so you know what? I don't have a problem. When in reality, they do. But the act of denying sort of helps them cope with that anxiety of, maybe I do need help. Maybe there's something, maybe something is wrong with me. Maybe I shouldn't be drinking all the time. So they use it as like a way to cope with because it's better than facing the reality that, wow, maybe I do need to get help. So yeah, that's when denial would be used. Sorry, the slide was like glitching. I think took a while to get to the next one. Okay, and then another defense mechanism is compensation. And then compensation is making up for failures in one area by success in other areas. An example of this would be someone who is maybe weak academically but excellent in sports. So their failures may be academic, but in order to sort of make up for that or to compensate for that, they are really successful in another area, in this case, sports. So yeah, there are various examples you could use to sort of explain defense mechanisms. So yeah, and we can sort of see them in our own lives. I think it's really interesting to learn about these because then I learned about, maybe that's something I do sometimes. So it's pretty interesting to see it in that way. And then rationalization is another defense mechanism, which is creating a logical excuse for emotional or irrational behavior. So for example, a man buys a luxury car and then tells people that his old car was unreliable. So maybe deep down he has this feeling that, that luxury car, I really wanted it. I really thought I needed it at the time, but it was really expensive. Maybe it wasn't that smart of a decision. Maybe it's pretty irrational. So in order to sort of not have to deal with that anxiety or those thoughts of, maybe I made a decision, a person may use rationalization and create an excuse for a behavior that is irrational. In this case, he's making an excuse by telling people that his old car was unreliable, and so which warranted the need for a new luxury car. Because even if his old car was unreliable, he could have gotten just a regular maybe used car, but no, he went for the luxury car. So to sort of be okay with that anxiety of, yeah, maybe I shouldn't have done that, he uses rationalization. Okay, and then another defense mechanism is regression. And then regression is a mechanism of reverting to childish behavior. So an example of regression would be if a wife speaks to her husband in baby talk when delivering bad news. So that would be an example of sort of a regression or reverting to a childish behavior. So any questions about any of those so far, or any ones that were sort of unclear? Okay, I think there's two more on this slide. So we have sublimation. And sublimation is the channeling or redirecting of sexual or aggressive behaviors into a more socially acceptable outlet. So an example of sublimation may be going for a jog when your siblings make you mad. So that is a way for someone to cope with the anxiety of getting into an argument with their siblings. Instead of doing something that is socially undesirable, such as fighting them or being physical with them, they decide to take their aggressive feelings out on a jog or swim or run, bike, whatever helps to relieve that anxiety from the stressful situation. Okay, I thought there was another one on there, so no, that was the last one. Okay, so now we're going to talk about Neo-Freudians. So Carl Jung was a Neo-Freudian, and he believes in a collective unconscious, which basically states that there's a shared inherited reservoir of memory, which sort of helps to explain common myths across cultures and times, that people across different lands can sort of have some of the same explanations for certain occurrences in life. And then there is Karen Horney, which said that personality develops in context of social relationships and not sexual urges, and that security, not sex, is motivation. And she also believed that men had this thing called womb envy, which is basically a jealousy towards female anatomy, or which is basically, yeah, that is what womb envy is. So these are two important people to know for the AP test. Probably could be some multiple choice questions about them. May ask about collective unconscious. The answer will be Carl Jung. And then anytime you see womb envy or Neo-Freudian, it's important to recognize Karen Horney. Oops, okay, I think I didn't mean that. Okay, so now we're going to be talking about the humanistic perspective. Okay, so the humanistic perspective really emphasizes a personal growth and free will. Really the belief that people can grow personally, they can grow from bad situations, become better, and that they have the free will in their lives and the ability to make their own decisions in their own lives. Whereas far as Freud thought that a lot of it was driven by unconscious desires and unconscious beliefs, etc., the humanistic perspective really believes that humans have the free will. They can change the way they do things and the way that they control their own lives. So, self-concept introduced, sorry, that's a typo, by Carl Rogers, not my, is really an idea of who we are. So self-concept, an idea of who we are as a person or as people. And then the self-concept, the idea of who we think we are, is really the center of our personalities. And so there is the social self, which is what others see. And then there is the ideal self, also as known as true self, which is who you want to be. So yeah, so the actual self, what others see, ideal self, who you want to be. And those are two important things to know about self-concept and about the humanistic perspective, because Carl Rogers was another famous humanist psychologist. Okay, and then a positive self-concept makes us perceive the world positively. Basically, like optimism. If you have a positive self-concept, if you see yourself in a way that is positive, it makes you perceive the world positively. And then if you have a negative self-concept, if you see yourself in a way that is negative, that can really that can make you feel dissatisfied and unhappy. Because remember, it is the center of your personality. So if the idea of who you are is negative, you're going to feel quite dissatisfied and unhappy in life. Okay, so back to, I know we talked about Maslow's hierarchy of needs earlier, but now we're going to talk about it in a different context. Now we're going to talk about it as in a personality context. Maslow believed that the fulfillment of hierarchy of needs is vital for the development of personality. So basically, in order to develop your personality, you have to go through, you have to fulfill the hierarchy of needs. So starting with physiological, which is food, water, rest, going towards safety, which would be security, towards love and belonging, which is intimate relationships, friends, onto esteem, which are feelings of accomplishment, Then lastly, on to self-actualization, which is achieving one's full potential. And back to what I said earlier, if anyone remembers, is it possible to skip a level on the hierarchy of needs, true or false? Can someone go automatically from physiological, which is just food, water, and rest, all the way to self-actualization? Is that possible? Okay, great. Yep, it is not possible. So that's important to remember. You have to progress through, starting from the bottom. Okay, so now we're going to talk about some trait perspectives. So traits are enduring personality characteristics, and people can be described as having these. So they can have strong and weak tendencies, and traits are stable, genetic, and predict other attributes. So the most important part of this definition to remember is that traits are stable. And here I just have an image of certain different types of traits: thoughtful, careful, passive, outgoing, excitable, aggressive. Those are examples of traits: optimistic, activist, pessimistic, anxious, quiet, etc. And then how are these traits determined? Well, in order to find traits, there's this process called factor analysis, which is used. And factor analysis is the statistical procedure used to identify similar components. Okay, now we're going to go to some trait theories. So there is the Big Five acronym OCEAN. This was created by McCrae, which was on one of the earlier slides, where I had all the topics of AP Psychology for personality. So, actually, does anyone know all five? If you already learned it in school, go way remember. I guess that's practice if you can see if you already remember them, if you already know. But if not, no big deal. I'm just going to go over them anyway. Okay, so remember the acronym OCEAN, which describes the Big Five traits. So O stands for openness, which can be imaginative, independent, like variety. And then conscientiousness, organized, careful, disciplined. Whereas extroversion is to be sociable, fun-loving, affectionate. And remember, the opposite of extroversion is actually introversion, which is being shy, timid, or reserved. So they're complete opposites. Extroversion, you can think extra, really out there, sociable, fun-loving, affectionate. Intro, you can think really internal, into self, shy, timid, reserved. Thinking about it that way can maybe help you remember the difference between the two. And then agreeableness, soft-hearted, trusting, helpful. That's basically what to be agreeable means. Are you able to be helpful, trusting, soft-hearted? And then neuroticism, emotional stability. Are you calm and secureness? So these are the Big Five OCEAN traits, or I said Big Five OCEAN, sorry, Big Five traits. Helps remember with the acronym OCEAN, OCEAN. Openness, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, neuroticism, and neuroticism. Okay, so quick, what was the difference between extroversion and introversion? I'll give you guys a few seconds if you want to answer from the remembering. Okay, so the difference, or actually, no, this is a little bit longer. I'll give a few minutes. Someone's still typing. I'm not sure. Okay, so the main difference is that to think about extroversion. Okay, great. Yeah, extroversion is sociable, and introversion is shy and reserved. Great, because extroversion, you could think extra, external, very sociable, and then introversion, you could think internal, which is to be shy, to be reserved, and to self. Okay, so now I'm going to talk about some different tests and some different testing for traits. And here's, on this image, I have a personality type key, which has different personality types. So you have extroverts, which are energized by people, and they really enjoy a variety of tasks. They're pretty quick paced and are good at multitasking. Then you have introverts, which introverts tend to like to work alone or in small groups, prefer a deliberate pace, and like to focus on one task at a time. Then the next quadrant talks about sensors and intuitives. There's two different types of people. Some people are sensors, some people are intuitives. So sensors are realistic people who like to focus on facts and details, like they apply common sense, they use past experiences, come up with practical solutions to problems. And then, or you can be an intuitive. The intuitives are a little bit different. Intuitives prefer to focus on possibilities, and they like to focus on big picture. And intuitives are really good at seeing patterns and trends, and they really value innovation, and they seek to create creative solutions to problems. So sensors like to create practical solutions, and intuitives create creative solutions. And then the next quadrant, there's another type of there's two different other types of people, which can be thinkers or feelers. You can either be a thinker or a feeler. So thinkers tend to make decisions using logical analysis, objectively weighing pros and cons, and they value honesty, consistency, and fairness, whereas feelers tend to be quite sensitive and cooperative, and they like to make decisions based off of their own personal values and how others would be affected by their actions. So feelers are pretty empathetic. And then again, in the last quadrant, there's judgers, which judgers tend to be organized and prepared. They like to make and stick to plans and are comfortable with following most rules, whereas other people can be perceivers. And perceivers prefer to tend to keep their options open. They like to act spontaneously. So maybe one day they're like, I want to do this. I want to do something differently. I want to go outside what society wants or something as such. Where a judger likes to stick to what is planned and stick to rules, or a perceiver may like to be spontaneous. And they're flexible with making plans, whereas judges are really organized and strict with their plan making. Perceiver is really loose with their plan making, maybe not even follow through with some of their plans some of the times. So yeah, people can be described with these personality types and being one of each quadrant. So, and one of the tests is an MMPI, which is really used it's helpful for mental health and job placement. So some jobs may have people take an MMPI. And another test that jobs may have people take, which is the Myers-Briggs, which is the four-letter combo. And I just went over all those personality types, which involves extroverts, introverts, sensors, intuitives, thinkers, feelers, judgers, and perceivers. And it's a four-letter combo because a person will have a letter from each quadrant. So you can be an ENTJ, for example. You may be extroverted, but you're also intuitive, and you're a thinker, and you're a judger. Has anyone actually taken the Myers-Briggs personality test and know what their personality type is? I've taken it before. I'm just curious if anyone else has. It's sort of interesting to see. It kind of makes sense to me when I took it, even though there are some issues with the testing. It was a pretty interesting test. It was fun. I took it for fun. So yeah, has anyone taken theirs? And if you have, what's your type? If you like to share, or if not, that's cool. But I recommend taking it for fun. You don't have to think too much into it. But it was a fun, interesting test to take. Okay, so like I mentioned briefly before, there are some issues with this test. One of the issues is that they're not too, well, some can be pretty long, yes, and social desirability can be an influence. So your answers may be shaped about what you think is desirable, which is why it's important to answer any test with honesty, but still, there's some sort of, bias in the answers because you may choose an answer, like going back to self-concept, you may answer based off of your ideal concept, the person you may want to be, instead of the person that you actually are, resulting in a false typing if you don't answer to your true self and you answer to what the person you want to be. Because the questions ask things such as how you work in groups and etc. to sort of determine your personality. If you don't answer those truthfully, it's not going to accurately reflect you and your personality. And then again, they're too broad. Some of the questions may be a little bit too broad, and therefore they're not able to generalize to populations or to specific people. And some could apply for multiple different types of people, etc. Okay, so lastly, I'm going to talk about the social cognitive perspective. So with a social cognitive perspective, it is the belief that behavior is a complex interaction of inner processes and environmental influence, which influences personality. So there's a strong emphasis, with the social cognitive perspective, there's a strong emphasis on conscious awareness, beliefs, expectations, and goals. And then continuing along with the social cognitive perspective, we have this, going back to this, does this make sense to everyone? The social cognitive perspective, the belief that behavior is an interaction of both inner processes and environmental influence. So behavior is determined by internal things as well as your external environmental influences influence your personality and who you are as a person. Both your inner, maybe your thoughts, and your environmental, like where you live, your family life, etc. Those things both influence your personality. Okay, and then going back to another point of the social cognitive perspective, there is the reciprocal determinism, which is, I have like this triad image of behavior, which is actions and decisions, environment, external spaces, laws, objects, then person, cognitive, emotion, physical. And so the reciprocal determinism created by Alfred Bandura states that individuals are made up from the interaction of all of these three things. So they're made up of the interaction of behavior, cognitions, and environment. That sort of determines their personality. So for example, Alex is very outgoing. That would be his behavior, his actions, his decisions. He's outgoing. So as a result of being outgoing, Alex chooses to go to parties because they let him to be outgoing. They let him be outgoing, which is the environment, the party. So therefore, and he has thought this through, which is why he continues to party despite his suffering grades, which would be the cognitive part of it. So behavior, environment, cognitive / cognitive right here, as you can see, behavior, environment, person, cognitive. So yes, so he's made up of those three things. He's outgoing, great. So he takes his outgoingness and chooses to go to parties because they let him be outgoing. And then he thought about this decision, and he's like, yeah, I'm outgoing. I like to be in an environment that makes me outgoing, so I'm going to go to parties. And yeah, my grades may be suffering from it. I thought about this, but I still go to parties, which is the cognition that is attached to this. Does that make sense to anyone? Is there any part that's maybe confusing? I know some of these theories can be a little confusing and a little complex. So if there's ever any questions about, or if you ever want me to reword something or say it in a different way, I'm totally available to do that. So just let me know, and I can explain it in a different way, or maybe a part that may not be clear. Okay, I think this is the last slide for today's stream, and it is just some more terms relating to the social cognitive perspective. Okay, so self-efficacy. This is a pretty important term, a very important term to know on the AP exam, because it can be tested on both. Like I said, it can be tested on multiple choice And FRQs, click on the FRQ. It may ask you to attach this term to a specific experience or scenario. And on the multiple choice, it could just simply ask from a list of terms and define, and to say that if you know what this term means, you can answer correctly on both the multiple choice and FRQ. So self-efficacy is the belief that one can succeed. So therefore, if you believe you can succeed, you ensure that you do. And then another important term to know for the AP exam would be internal locus of control. So the key word in this, which really gives away the answer, or what the term means, is internal, and then control. So the internal locus of control is saying that you control your own fate. You have control over your own fate. Then the external locus of control, again, external, think about what that means. Control, think about what that means, and then boom, you have the answer. So there are outside forces that control your fate. So internal, you have your own motivations, your drive, your ambitions. External, maybe where you live, maybe you don't have the same resources, etc. Those things control your fate. So like some things are always going to be outside of your control, like where you live, the family you're grown into, etc., etc. Those things control your fate, but they are not within your own control, because within your control, you can control your ambition, your motivation, how well you want to do a task, but there are going to be some things that you cannot. So yeah, that's basically the summary for mesh and personality. So we went through a lot of stuff today. I know some of it is a little complex, especially some of the theories can be a little difficult. So if you ever want to refer back to anything that we went over today, you can just go to fiveable.me, and then you can rewatch the stream or skip, and you can also skip to certain parts that you may have missed, or parts that weren't too clear, and go back and read the slides. Or so yeah, that's basically it for this stream. So before I end the stream, were there any other questions about any particular parts from mesh or personality that you want me to go over before I end the stream? If not, thank you for watching, and I really appreciate you being here. And yeah, I hope you enjoyed, and I hope you learned a lot from the stream. Or I hope it was also good practice for you if you already knew some of these things, and that it just sort of strengthened and reinforced some of the things that you already knew. So I hope it was helpful in some way. So yeah. So if there are no questions or any particular things, I will end the stream, but I'll wait a few moments or seconds, because some people may be typing questions, so I'll wait a minute to see. And if not, thank you guys. Really appreciate you being here. Okay, so I don't see any particular questions now, which is fine, so that's great. But if you have any questions, you can always use Fiveable.me, watch some of the past streams, go to some of the websites created and some of the content created. I know we're putting out some study guides soon, so all those materials are going to help you guys do well on the AP test. So yeah, good luck. Thanks for joining, and I'll see you guys later. Bye.